It was July 8, 1970, a golden summer afternoon, when the Harper family stepped through the iconic gates of Disneyland. The park buzzed with excitement, the clinking of carousel music, laughter from children, and the distant chime of the Main Street Parade. For 9-year-old Emily Harper, it was the dream of a lifetime, clutching a Mickey Mouse balloon and wearing her favorite yellow sundress with daisy buttons. She skipped ahead of her parents, mesmerized by the magical world around her. It was her first visit, and her eyes sparkled with wonder. After a few hours exploring rides and attractions, the family made their way toward It's a Small World, one of the park's newest and most popular attractions at the time. The wait was long, and Emily grew restless. According to her mother, she asked if she could go look at a nearby souvenir cart just a few feet away. Her father gave a casual nod, thinking nothing of it. She was within sight, just beyond the crowd. But when the line finally moved forward, and the parents turned to call her back, Emily was no longer there. At first, they assumed she had wandered into the crowd, perhaps to get a closer look at the parade that had just passed. But after 10 minutes of searching, concern turned to panic. The Harpers began shouting her name, asking strangers, scanning every child in the area. A cast member noticed the distressed couple and alerted security. Within the hour, Disneyland security had shut down multiple nearby exits, notified Anaheim police, and began a comprehensive search of the entire park. Still, there was no trace of Emily. No one had seen her leave, and no one remembered noticing a little girl matching her description. What alarmed investigators most was the sheer lack of evidence. Emily hadn't been seen screaming, crying, or being pulled away. There was no abandoned balloon, no shoe left behind, no purse or dropped item. Even the souvenir vendor didn't recall seeing her, despite being just yards from where she supposedly was. The surveillance systems of the 1970s were limited. Basic security cameras covered only the entrance gates and cash handling areas, leaving most of the park a blind spot. It was as if Emily had simply vanished, 1 second present, the next erased from existence. The case quickly drew media attention. Disneyland had never experienced a disappearance like this. Flyers were printed. News anchors broadcast her photo across California. Volunteers combed the park for days. Undercover officers mixed with guests. Rumors swirled. Some believed she had fallen into one of the artificial waterways. Others speculated about secret rooms and underground tunnels. But as days turned to weeks, hope began to fade. The happiest place on Earth had become the site of a chilling mystery, one that left a permanent shadow over that sunlit summer day. Within minutes of Emily's disappearance, Disneyland's cheerful atmosphere shifted into quiet tension. What had started as a typical summer day at the theme park suddenly became the epicenter of a growing crisis. Emily's parents, now trembling with panic, reported her missing to a nearby cast member, who immediately notified security. A discreet code was broadcast over the internal radio system, Code Alpha, Lost Child, prompting every staff member within the area to begin searching. Unbeknownst to the guests, an invisible net was being cast across the park. But what no one expected was that nothing would be caught in it. As the first 30 minutes passed without any trace, Disneyland initiated a Level 2 security lock, rare and serious procedure at the time. Park exits were quietly manned by plainclothes officers and staff instructed to watch for anyone matching Emily's description. Guests were allowed to leave only after bag checks, while employees combed ride queues, bathrooms, backstage corridors, and employee-only access tunnels. The It's a Small World attraction was temporarily closed, and divers were brought in to inspect the decorative waterways in and around the ride, just in case the unthinkable had happened. Despite the intensity of the operation, no evidence surfaced. No one had seen a girl in a yellow sundress wander off. No guests recalled hearing screams or signs of a struggle. Police dogs brought in by Anaheim PD were given a piece of Emily's clothing, but even they couldn't track her beyond the immediate area near the souvenir cart. Investigators began to wonder, had she left the park entirely, or had someone taken her somewhere the public couldn't see? The unsettling possibility of an internal abduction began to creep into the case. Over the next few days, Disneyland transformed from a fantasy playground into a heavily scrutinized crime scene. Security camera footage from ticket booths and main entrances was reviewed frame by frame. Employees, especially those in costume or custodial roles, were interviewed and fingerprinted. Dozens of guests were asked to stay for further questioning. Emily's image, her smiling photo with front teeth missing, was plastered on every local news station. A hotline was set up for tips, and yet, not a single credible lead emerged. The investigation seemed to hit a brick wall, no matter which direction it turned. Behind closed doors, tensions escalated between park officials and law enforcement. Disneyland executives feared the damage to their wholesome brand image, while detectives demanded more transparency about underground access tunnels, restricted staff-only zones, and undocumented storage areas. Rumors began to swirl among employees. Some whispered about an unmarked utility hatch near Fantasyland. Others mentioned a disgruntled maintenance worker who had suddenly quit the week before. But none of it could be verified. As the park resumed normal operations, the search grew colder. Emily Harper had vanished, and with each passing hour, it seemed more likely that she had never intended to be found. As weeks turned into months, with no progress, the Emily Harper case shifted from a local tragedy to a national enigma. People couldn't understand how a child could disappear in one of the most monitored and crowded places in America. The media began to speculate, was it human error, a perfect crime, or something far more sinister? As coverage grew and official answers remained elusive, conspiracy theories began to bubble up from the shadows, each more unsettling than the last. One of the earliest and most persistent theories focused on Disneyland's underground tunnel system, known internally as the utility. These tunnels, originally designed to help cast members move between sections without being seen, were largely unknown to the public in the 1970s. Whispers spread. What if Emily had been taken below? What if someone who knew the tunnel layout, perhaps a maintenance worker, performer, or even a security officer, had led her down, where no cameras or guests could see? Some former employees later came forward anonymously, claiming that certain tunnel maps were never documented or were intentionally erased after the disappearance. Another theory turned darker. Some speculated that Emily had never actually left the park. Urban legends formed around the idea that she had accidentally died, and her body was hidden to protect Disneyland's reputation. These rumors were fueled by eerie stories from night shift workers. Some claimed they heard distant giggling in locked storage rooms, or found child-sized footprints in off-limits areas with no explanation. One custodian even claimed he saw a little girl in a yellow dress staring at him from the end of an underground hallway, only for her to vanish when he called out, though easily dismissed as imagination or hoaxes. These accounts kept the public's interest and fear alive. Then came the more organized theories. Those who believed Emily had been abducted as part of a larger human trafficking operation. They argued that the chaos and size of Disneyland made it the perfect place for a well-planned kidnapping. Online forums speculated that employees might have been bribed, complicit, or even coerced into helping. A few conspiracy enthusiasts pointed to other cold cases of missing children in Southern California around the same time, wondering if there was a hidden connection. A pattern: everyone was missing. Despite no solid evidence, these theories flourished, largely because nothing else made sense. The most bizarre rumors claimed something supernatural had occurred. Some believed the Harper family had stumbled upon a hidden part of the park that wasn't meant for visitors. A phantom zone, as one blog described it, a forgotten building or corridor that trapped those who entered. Others blamed the disappearance on old curses tied to the land the park was built on, referencing vague stories of native burial grounds or spiritual unrest. While these tales sounded like fiction, they became folklore, told again and again in dimly lit corners of the internet. And with every new theory, the line between truth and myth blurred further, leaving Emily's case not just unsolved, but legendary. In the days following Emily's disappearance, the Harper family clung to hope like a lifeline. Flyers with her face were stapled to telephone poles, taped to shop windows, and mailed to every household in Southern California. Her mother, Laura Harper, refused to leave Anaheim, sleeping in motels close to the park, just in case Emily turned up. Her father, Daniel Harper, grew quiet, staring for hours at the spot where she vanished, replaying every detail over and over in his mind. But as the days stretched into weeks, and weeks into months, that hope slowly began to curdle into something darker. Laura began blaming Daniel, accusing him of not watching their daughter closely enough, of nodding too casually when she asked to wander off. Daniel, in turn, grew resentful of her anger, believing that the guilt was being misdirected. Their grief became a battlefield. Therapists were called. Family friends intervened. But nothing could soften the damage. Their home in San Diego, once filled with the sound of cartoons and little footsteps, grew silent and cold. Emily's room was left untouched, her drawings still taped to the walls, her stuffed animals neatly arranged on the bed, as if she might return at any moment. By 1973, just 3 years after the disappearance, Laura filed for divorce. She couldn't bear to live in the same house where every shadow reminded her of her daughter. She moved to Oregon, changed jobs, and cut off all media contact. When reporters tried to reach her for anniversary interviews or updates on the case, she declined every time. In her mind, Emily was either dead or being kept somewhere beyond reach. She couldn't live suspended in mystery anymore. From that point on, she never spoke publicly about the case again. Daniel, however, took the opposite path. Consumed by guilt and a need for answers, he abandoned his job as a construction foreman and began investigating Emily's disappearance. Full-time, he rented a small van and lived out of it near Anaheim, spending his days interviewing former Disneyland employees, attending park auctions, and researching obscure blueprints of the park's original infrastructure. Locals began to recognize him, the scruffy man in the parking lot with maps, old photos, and a wall of timelines pinned inside his van. Some called him obsessed, others pitied him, but he didn't care. He believed someone out there knew something, and he wouldn't stop until he found them. Over the years, Daniel's pursuit turned desperate. He tried reaching out to psychics, former security guards, even underground conspiracy forums. He chased rumors to abandoned warehouses, storm drains, and even the Mojave Desert. Following any tip that mentioned a girl in a yellow dress, each lead ended the same way, nowhere. And with each dead end, his face grew more hollow, his notes more erratic. Emily's case hadn't just taken his daughter, it had stolen his marriage, his sanity, and any future he once imagined. But still, he searched. Because deep down, some part of him couldn't accept that his little girl had simply disappeared. Forever, 20 years had passed since Emily Harper vanished. And the case had long gone cold, faded from news headlines and now buried under 2 decades of unanswered questions. But in February 1990, a once-in-a-generation storm swept across Southern California, dumping record-breaking rain across Orange County. Rivers overflowed, fields turned to lakes, and in the quiet outskirts of Santa Ana, just 15 miles south of Disneyland, the normally calm Harwood Creek swelled with muddy runoff, bursting through its banks and flooding low-lying farmland in the early hours of the morning. Among the affected properties was Harwood Ranch, a modest plot owned by a local farmer named Elliot Granger, who had lived on the land his entire life. For 2 days, the fields were submerged under 3 feet of water, carrying debris, branches, and fragments of God knows what from nearby towns. When the storm finally broke, Elliot waited out to assess the damage. The fencing had been uprooted, a few chickens had gone missing, and his old barn had collapsed at the rear, but it was something half buried near a clump of uprooted trees. Along the creek's new path, that stopped him in his tracks, jutting out from the soft, freshly churned earth, was the edge of what looked like a rusted metal box. At first, Elliot assumed it was a storage container or discarded equipment pulled in from upstream. But as he cleared the mud and roots away with his shovel, he realized it was something stranger, a vintage school locker, corroded, dented, and covered in grime. Curious but uneasy, he pried it open, expecting little more than old papers or clothes. Instead, the moment the door creaked loose, a foul, earthy smell spilled out, and inside, he found something that would make national headlines within days. Inside the locker were several objects, aged and weather-worn, but unmistakably preserved. A child's yellow sundress, faded and clinging to itself from years of damp rot. A pair of white canvas sneakers, tiny and dirt-stained. And worst of all, 2 Polaroid photographs, warped by moisture but still clearly visible. The first was a smiling little girl around 9 years old, with a familiar face. Her name didn't need to be spoken. Even after 2 decades, the public had seen that face 100 times. It was Emily Harper. Her smile was innocent, her eyes trusting, her surroundings unfamiliar. The second photo was darker, more disturbing. It showed Emily again, but this time she wasn't alone. Standing behind her was a man, partially obscured by shadow, wearing what appeared to be a Disneyland maintenance uniform from the 1970s. His hand rested gently on Emily's shoulder. His face was not immediately recognizable, but something about the posture, the setting, the expression. It sent a chill down the spine of every investigator who viewed it. The photos were immediately turned over to authorities. The locker was carefully transported, catalogued, and sealed for forensic analysis. And just like that, after 2 long decades, the mystery of Emily Harper was pulled back into the spotlight, not with answers, but with even deeper questions. The rusted locker recovered from the flood became the epicenter of renewed national attention. News stations swarmed Harwood Ranch, helicopters circled overhead, and FBI agents quickly sealed off the area. Forensics teams began the delicate task of preserving its contents. Every item inside was treated as sacred evidence from a two-decade-old mystery that had never stopped haunting investigators. The locker, estimated to be over 25 years old, had suffered water damage, but it was astonishing how well some of the contents had survived. It was as if the past had been preserved in a metal tomb waiting to be found. The yellow sundress found inside the locker was quickly confirmed by Emily's mother, Laura, as the one her daughter had worn the day she disappeared. Despite 2 decades of grief and distance from the public eye, Laura recognized it instantly. She collapsed into tears upon seeing the image of the dress again. The shoes, too, matched photos from family album steamy white sneakers, with a single daisy embroidered near the heel. But it was the 2 photographs found tucked inside that stunned everyone, including the seasoned agents on the case. They weren't just snapshots, they were a frozen moment in time. Loaded with sinister weight in the first photo, Emily stands against a nondescript beige wall, smiling, the innocence in her eyes paired with the uncanny sterility of the back, the image deeply unsettling. There were no Disney landmarks, no friends or family in the frame. Just her and that wall. But it was the second photo that investigators couldn't stop analyzing. A man stood behind her, face partially turned, obscured by shadow. His uniform bore the faint traces of a Disneyland maintenance patch, barely visible through years of decay. His stance was casual, but controlling. His hand rested on Emily's shoulder in a way that now seemed far too possessive. Dozens of Disney employees from the 1960s and 70s were contacted, but no one could positively identify the man in the image. His face was partially blocked by light, glare, and digital enhancement only went so far. The background wall matched no known area of the parkour, so Disneyland claimed. But some online sleuths suggested otherwise. Independent researchers pointed out similarities to a long-demolished employee building near the old Fantasyland perimeter, torn down in the early 80s. Blueprints from that era were incomplete, missing pages, or outright redacted. It was as if certain records had been deliberately removed or hidden. Adding to the mystery, the locker itself had no serial number. Investigators initially believed it was a repurposed school locker, but deeper analysis found evidence that it had once been bolted into a concrete foundation, consistent with long-term institutional use, possibly in a backstage area. Rust patterns indicated it had been moved, likely dragged across rough terrain, then buried or dumped near the creek years earlier. But why there? Who brought it to Harwood Ranch? And more disturbingly, what else might still be hidden in forgotten places, carrying clues that no one had thought to look for in decades? The FBI's discovery that the locker had once been bolted down raised troubling questions. This wasn't a discarded personal item, tossed carelessly by a passerby. It had once been part of a structured stationery, intentional, and possibly hidden from public access. Lab tests on the locker's exterior revealed traces of industrial paint used during the late 1960s in underground infrastructure, a specific brand of primer used by contractors during Disneyland's early expansions. This quietly stunned investigators. Suddenly, the once ridiculed theory about Disneyland's hidden tunnels wasn't just a rumor, it had physical evidence to back it up. Digging deeper, authorities uncovered a forgotten construction permit filed in 1971, roughly a year after Emily vanished. It detailed the sealing and removal of a subterranean maintenance wing beneath the park, one that had never been part of the publicly released blueprints. The documents referenced unnecessary storage units, but key sections were missing, blacked out, or misfiled entirely. One line, barely legible, mentioned locker reallocation due to water infiltration. Investigators realized with growing horror, the locker Emily had been found in may have originally been stored beneath Disneyland itself, in an area intentionally buried and erased from record just months after her disappearance. The implications were staggering. It meant someone, possibly an employee with high-level access, had abducted Emily, concealed her in an off-grid section of the park, and used an internal system to keep her hidden. But who, why, and how had they managed to do it without being seen or caught? Composite sketches of the man in the photograph were distributed again, but no one came forward. Disneyland refused to comment publicly, issuing only vague statements about their cooperation. Rumors swirled online that the man had once worked in electrical maintenance and had disappeared from payroll records in 1971, the same year the tunnel wing was sealed. but no name was confirmed. No family claimed him. It was as if the man in the photograph, the only adult ever connected to Emily's disappearance, had been erased just as thoroughly as the locker's original location. Meanwhile, forensic teams returned to Harwood Ranch, searching miles of nearby creek banks, digging with ground-penetrating radar, hoping to find more evidence. What they found, however, only raised more questions. A second locker-sized imprint in the soil, empty, as if something else had once been buried and removed before the flood. Whatever had been inside, it was gone, taken before anyone could notice. The case, once cold, was now alive again, but not with answers, only with deeper, darker questions. Who was the man in the photo? How did he smuggle Emily out of the most secure theme park in the world without detection? Why did Disneyland have blueprints with sealed tunnels that no one was willing to acknowledge? And most chilling of all, was Emily ever truly the only one? To this day, no one knows for certain what happened to Emily Harper after she vanished in the heart of the happiest place on earth. Her body was never found. The man in the photograph was never identified, and the locker buried in silence. For 20 years remains the only piece of evidence to surface from beneath the layers of secrets, cement, and time. Disneyland has never reopened the investigation on their end. Key records remain sealed. Retired employees who worked during that era describe a lingering unease, like something was covered up. Something that should have never been allowed to happen in a place built on joy, fantasy, and trust. Emily's case is more than a mystery. It's a warning that sometimes, the most dangerous places aren't abandoned roads or dark alleys, but places we believe are the safest. And that beneath the bright lights, catchy music, and carefully polished stories, there may be shadows that were never meant to be seen. So the next time you visit a theme park, look a little closer. Behind the laughter, beneath the surface. Ask yourself, what's really hiding behind the magic?
If you liked this video, don't forget to hit that like button, share it with your friends, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. Most importantly, subscribe and hit the bell icon so the next secret finds you first.